My name is Dario Hasenstab. I'm here with Walter Hageritz, and we are back with the Western Bubble podcast for the last time this summer before we go into our well-deserved summer break. Today, we are comparing the Western Bubble in the United States with the Western Bubble in Europe with a heavy focus on personal responsibility. Hi, Walter. Why are we talking about this topic today, right? Why are we speaking about particularly this in our last episode for the season?
Hi, Daria. Well, I guess that before the summer break, it's useful to remind, especially our European audience, that what we are observing in the United States is not that far away from who we are, right? And has been always this sense that Europe is like 2 decades behind the United States, for better and for worse. There's often this idea lingering in European minds that we are the more reasonable version of the extremism that we see from across the pond. And unfortunately, that's not necessarily the case, in the sense that there's nothing really reasonable about how Europe is behaving at the moment either. It is just that we do it in a slightly less noticeable way. The United States is always bigger, more visible. And so it might be useful going into the summer break to remind our European listeners of this. Now, I should say, when we talk about Europe versus the United States, we are very much aware that also these dynamics apply to, for example, Australia and other countries that we include within Western politics. Obviously, it's not just Europe versus the United States, but it is often useful to just focus on these two different continents as good examples.
Yeah, absolutely. Australia, we're looking at you. New Zealand, right? Also, depending on the topic, we have included Japan, South Korea within the Western Bubble.
Well, and we're today, I'm sure we're going to mention, and I'm sure because we already talked about that before recording, that we're going to mention immigration. And those are things that are very, very similar in these countries, right? Japan just last week has had political events very much focused on this. Australia is continuously struggling with its immigration policy and how to deal with its own identity versus changing global dynamics. Shout out to all of those other countries that have similar problems than the ones that we observe here in Europe.
Let's start with the problems here in Europe, because I actually couldn't wait to record this episode because I've been really angry for the past week. Because last week, I think right after we recorded, I stumbled upon a book, Boulder. And at first we thought about, let's do a book review for the last for the last episode of the season. Then the topics started piling up, and we decided to take it more towards maybe a comparison between the United States and Europe. Because this book, Boulder, was published by Frontex. And for the listeners who don't know about this, Frontex is basically the European version of ICE. Right, so they are kind of in charge of, most importantly, of keeping the European borders safe, big air quotes, so kind of for regulating that, and also for they're in charge of deportations, right? So kind of organizing this in a pan-European way. I think this is the perfect example to show how the Europeans always think of themselves of being a little more sophisticated than the Yankees, right? The big truck, big burger Americans who are dragging people out of the courts, right, to deport them, right? I mean, I think we've all seen those ICE videos of the despicable actions they're undertaking. And so the Europeans are, of course, we're so cultured, right? We don't do that. No, we also deport people. We might not drag them out of their cars or out of the courts. It does happen a little bit more orderly. But this level of sophistication, again, big air quotes, in my opinion, is just as despicable, even if not a little bit more, just because it's so much a slap in the face. Boulder, the book that I'm talking about is a book for little children, kind of your guidebook to being deported.
Yeah, you sent it to me. It almost, when I opened it, I thought it was some kind of dark parody. It is absolutely horrifying, this idea that, we're going to send children away because, we have lost all our basic morality and principles, and we have no qualms about this process. but let's just hide it in a nice little book with lovely cartoon, with lovely pictures, in nice simple language to make it all sound reasonable and humane. Now, I would expect ICE not to have these little books, so this is a very good example of Europe trying to pretend that their policies are kinder or more reasonable, whereas in reality it's equally horrifying. I am sure, by the way, that if any of our listeners works for Frontex and just heard you to compare them to ICE, that they would be furious. How dare you compare Frontex to ICE? But you're absolutely right. I mean, it's essentially the same pattern, just with a slightly different tone, but the outcome is similar or even worse. Quick side note, by the way, to show what kind of Orwellian world we live in. We the European Union puts Frontex into the policy domain of freedom, security, and justice. Well, our current immigration system, specifically when it comes to children, has nothing to do with freedom, security, or justice. So it's basically just doublespeak.
The entire time I read through it, right, and everyone can read through this. It's publicly available as a PDF printout, right? So it's not even a hardcover book they're giving these kids, which to me sparked this image in my mind where you have this small little girl standing there with her backpack and her teddy bear, and then a 10-page printout stapled together, which basically tells you, oh, how lovely it is to be deported. Right? It's again, to me, this book is so disgusting, and it's also so bad, right? Just on a content level, it's also really bad because it basically talks about, oh, you may have received the news that you're being deported. What does that even mean? It means you can't stay here at the moment, and you're going to have to leave together with your parents. By the way, there's also a version for unaccompanied minors, right? So I actually didn't notice that we also deport children without their parents. Right, that again, just to highlight to how despicable all of this gets, is that we create these books specifically for the kids who are traveling without their parents because they need a little extra help. But right, so the book starts with that. Hey, you might be feeling like this, but hey, you have rights, right? These are the UN rights for children. You have a lot of them. Here, you can write down your feelings about this. Oh, great, thank you.
On the page where you can download the book, I mean, we, by the way, have now a problem for our podcast. Do we link to the book and give this further publicity or not, right? That's always one of those issues. But they write on the website, this addresses the return of unaccompanied minors or children within families. It's a delicate matter that demands a humane approach. This approach must not only respect fundamental rights, but also prioritize the child's best interest. Clear, comprehensive information about return procedures is essential, blah, 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 and that it's important for all stakeholders to have access to the right tools. This is just complete insanity, right? But it's not an insanity created by Frontex. It's not even insanity created by the European Union. It already exists in member states individually. There is this horrifying case of an Afghan boy in the Netherlands who was born either on the way to the Netherlands or in the Netherlands itself, with his mother fleeing the violence, which, by the way, was largely created by Europeans in Afghanistan. The boy never lived in Afghanistan, doesn't know anything about the country, speaks perfect Dutch and all that. Now, at the age of 12, he has been sent back because he didn't have permission to stay permanently. We now live in a society, in a world where that is apparently acceptable. A 12-year-old who's always lived in the Netherlands has to go back to a country that he's never lived in because of our paranoia about the outsider, about those who are not us. It comes from society itself, and in many ways these institutions are essentially copying that kind of behavior and trying to connect to those kinds of feelings, those dark underbelly feelings that exist within society. It means that we have completely lost the moral plot, and nobody can look at Europe or the European Union or member countries at the moment and say these are morally righteous countries. We are the good guys in history. No, we are absolutely the bad guys in history. And that doesn't require eyes from the United States to show, right? We just look at a book like this and you can see how much we've lost the moral plot.
Yeah, but Boulder, in the text you read out, it says that right, it kind of decisions made should be in the child's best interest. I mean, surely having a book that helps you to arrive in Afghanistan and I don't know, find a new home, find a new house, right? Because it does talk about these things in the chapters. It's like, hey, once you arrive in a new country, you might feel lonely, and then the worst part comes in, right? But hey, this is full of new open opportunities and everything, and won't it be so great? It's surely it would be in the kid's best interest not to be deported back to Afghanistan. But maybe it would be in the kid's best interest to stay in the Netherlands and receive all the help in the world.
Well, obviously, and here's what you often hear, and that is infuriating to me, where people say, well, it's complicated, it's complex. If we make an exception here, then we have to give all kinds of exceptions to all kinds of others. This is just one anecdotal example, but from a bigger picture, we can't just let everyone in. Well, we can have a conversation about how many people we can let in and or not, and that's a reasonable conversation. And how we should manage people coming in, that's also a very reasonable conversation. But the fact is that our society is sending a 12-year-old boy back to a country that he doesn't know. That, as one anecdote, is enough. If it had been because of some administrative error, right, that would be something different. If someone made a mistake somewhere in the European Union or in the Netherlands, and unfortunately 1 or 2 children or 10 children were sent back when they shouldn't have done that, then that is an unfortunate error, and that's something we can correct. But that's not what's happening here. The European Union is publishing this book, basically justifying the process under the guise of we have to take care of the kids' best interest. The moment your society is sending back children systematically to war zones, to countries that they're not familiar with, to countries where they don't want to be, at that moment, your society is morally depraved. It's that simple. And this is based on thousands of years of moral understanding. Look at any religion and it says, be kind to your neighbor, protect children, make sure that children are not punished for the mistakes of their parents. The moment you break those very basic moral tenets is the moment that your society can no longer claim to be on the good side of history.
As I said, I only stumbled upon this on social media, and that surprised me because usually, I don't know, about stuff like this, I feel like that's not something you usually learn through social media. And then I went on a quick internet research to look for the book because I want to see whether this was actually real or whether maybe someone was just blabbing. I found the book, but something I didn't find is any news article, any commentary, anything by the media on this, right? And Balder, this was published in 2023. This is 2 years old. Nothing, not a single word on this, right? It's again, I mean, so my theory is that some overpaid communications consultancy company got paid too much money for this to create a humane, right? I don't know, to hit some numbers in the budget for making deportations more humane. I mean, I honestly hope that this book is not being handed out to children. I would feel terrible for these kids.
Well, the way I imagine it is that there's a big pile of them on the way out that they can grab when they are being put on the plane, right? That's how it probably works.
Well, I mean, that would be a little late because the book, right, it talks about, hey, you're being deported, write down your feelings, then you will be brought to a facility, with other families, will take good care of you there. Then you will be brought to the airport. Here's like a packing list for your airport. You can color your own passport. All these lovely little things. This is what happens on the plane. There might be a TV on the plane, and might be served some food depending on how long your flight is. And then you arrive in the new country, and everything is new and great, and so on and so forth. It makes me, I cannot describe how angry this makes me. I'm really holding on to myself right now not to scream.
But the fact that people haven't heard of this also shows exactly the pattern that I just described, right? It shows that these are institutional dynamics that exist in response to existing feelings within society, right? Now, and it's not the European Union being an extremist by itself. No, it is just trying to cater to what the large crowds want. And they publish this book after it becomes clear that European societies want to send children back. How this typically also works with the certain areas of gray is that you've got some anti-immigrant, extremists who basically don't want to let anyone in who isn't a millionaire, right? Who isn't from Saudi Arabia or is a rich American business person or something like that. They just will oppose any immigration. Then you've got a lot of people who are blaming their problems on immigration, even though immigration is not the cause of their problems. And those people will often hesitate a little bit when you ask them, should children be sent back? But they do create cover for that more extremist crowd, right? So you've got, it's shades of gray, if you like, and the darkest shades of gray are at extreme, and they are proud to be this extremist, often fascist, often some kind of neo-Nazi or something like that. Then you've got politicians who try to milk that, and they encourage people to essentially think of immigrants as an existential threat to them. And then when you ask a normal person that you walk into in the supermarket, like just a nice, kind person, hey, what do you think about this? Then they will say, oh, I'm not sure about whether children should be sent back, but immigration is a big problem and it's a crisis and too many people are coming in. And the result of that is that you've got an entire society with some more on the extreme side and some more on the, well, I guess you could call the moderate side, basically enabling, allowing, but even encouraging an institution like the European Union to publish a book like this. So the problem is society itself. It's the individuals who make up Western society that are responsible for this, not just governments.
Let's move on from one disgusting topic to another very difficult one, and that's the humanitarian situation in Gaza, where I mean, there's not a lot to analyze on the situation itself, right? It's very dire. People are starving, deprived of any humanitarian aid. Luckily, I want to say last night, right? And we're recording this on Sunday, the 27th of July. So maybe the next 3 days things will happen. I hope only good ones. But there was some form of an agreement reached that now at least some basic humanitarian aid can get into Gaza. But I mean, this is another one of those situations where currently it's very difficult for me to open the news in the morning, right? Because usually, I mean, I've talked about this before. Throughout my education at university, I've managed to create a bit of an emotional barrier between me and what I read, and that only once per week I kind of let it get to me, right? To prove to myself in the sense that I'm still human, right? Because otherwise it just makes you a bad analyst. At least that's what you've told me. And I must say that at the moment it's becoming really difficult because there's just so much bad stuff happening around the world. And then particularly you just see images, which I try to avoid, but you read so much about the dire humanitarian situation. And at the same time, you read, right, so from the United States, to kind of go back with the theme of this episode, you hear no, we support Israel in whatever they do, and right, Israel has the right to defend itself and all the usual talking points. And then again in Europe, it's not exactly the same talking points, but similar. Because ultimately the outcome is the same, is that Europe and the United States are both enabling Israel to do what it's currently doing, right, and that's starving people, while the Europeans are doing it in a more sophisticated way, right? Of being like, oh, we condemn what Israel is doing. The humanitarian situation is so important to us, human rights and all of the stuff that we usually care about, but not today.
Yeah, the difference in the United States and Europe is not one of policy, but Europe files a complaint before they implement exactly the same policy, right? Basically, Europe protests a little bit, whereas the United States never protests to Israel. I mean, the Biden administration had a few words of concern, but not much. The Trump administration really doesn't care. European governments will often just recall the Israeli ambassador or something like that, right? Just to show their unhappiness about the fact that tens of thousands of children have been murdered and hundreds of thousands of children are starving at the moment. But in the end, Europe enables Israel just like the United States enables Israel. And again, by the way, you see the same pattern. So to sort of weave this other theme into this, that European populations have these shades of gray, which creates ambiguity and which creates cover again. So you see European populations say, "Oh no, I find it horrible that children are starving, but the terrorists of Hamas," right? Just continuously, you see people then still bring up, "But Israel has a right to defend itself. Israel this, Israel that." Now, I would argue that unlike immigration, the support for Israel is a little bit more institutionally driven. Right? I think the majority of European population certainly are more critical of Israel than institutions are. Institutions have a closer connection to Israel than popular opinion, but the process is the same. Like, oh no, I don't want children in Gaza to be killed. I don't want them to starve. But at the same time, I understand that Israel needs to defend itself against terrorist acts, and that creates this dynamic that allows then the institutions to say, okay, well, Israel, just be careful. Don't go too far, as if they haven't already gone way too far for the past 2 years. And institutions basically feed on that kind of underbelly within European society. Once again, Europe is a continent that is very much responsible for the violence that is happening against Palestinians right now. There's no doubt about it. It's not just that they are passive onlookers, they are active enablers by sending military equipment, by maintaining good diplomatic ties with Israel, by having all kinds of economic arrangements. The fact that the United States is a little bit more open about it doesn't take any responsibility away from Europe.
So I'm glad that you mentioned the statements of, "Oh, I'm against kids starving," but because it so much reminds me of the, I'm not a Nazi, but, right? It's one of those very popular sayings here in Germany where people who want to represent a position on the right, they immediately have to say, "Well, I'm not a Nazi, but, migrants, many."
No, that's exactly the same as sending a 12-year-old back to Afghanistan. It's exactly the same process. It is so when you say, "I'm against children starving or being killed," then that's where the sentence should finish. That should be a full stop. And then the next sentence should be, "What can I do to make sure that never happens?" Right? I'm against a 12-year-old having to leave his home and be sent to a country that he's not familiar with. That is then the end of the sentence. Next sentence, how can we make sure that child can stay in the Netherlands? Instead, it becomes oh no, I want to signal that I have some sense of morality. But when it really comes to policy making, I accept that we do things that actually lead to that. So we, as a European society, just like the American society, but in Europe we pretend differently, we as European society actually enable these events. We are responsible for these things happening. And we just try to hide it by saying that we don't really like it. It really hurts us that children are starving. It really hurts us that unfortunately a 12-year-old has to be sent to Afghanistan. But, we've got other concerns as well.
I mean, the worst thing is that we're just blindly reproducing narratives spread by the Israeli government, right? I mean, because the sentence I've heard so many times in the past few months is, "I don't like what's happening in Gaza, but Hamas," right? "Oh, I mean, starving children is not a good thing, but Hamas benefits off of the food distribution because they steal it." Well, unfortunately for your narrative that you've blindly copied from the from the Israeli government or propaganda machine, unfortunately the IDF has found in an investigation that there is no proof that Hamas routinely stole United Nations aid, right? The main justification for the IDF to stop all forms of humanitarian deliveries by the United Nations into Gaza. And if you've said the sentence in the last 2 years, you need to look into the mirror, take a deep, long, good look, and ask yourself, how can I justify to myself, spoiler, you can't, that I have reproduced these narratives, that I have fallen a victim to propaganda, right? We always think of ourselves to be so educated and we're so sensible, right? And you can't fall for this Chinese or Russian propaganda because you're reproducing narratives. Well, you've just done the same. Look in the mirror and take some responsibility. Write an angry email, but nicely formulated, please don't insult anyone, to your representative, to your government, right? And state that, hey, this is outrageous. How can it be that my government is supporting this?
Underlying that is the entrenched tribalism that we're all victim of, right? We are open to propaganda if that propaganda reinforces our tribal instincts. And that's again the same with immigration, by the way. So we like thinking of outsiders and insiders. Immigrants are outsiders, asylum seekers are outsiders. They are there to hurt us. We need to defend the in crowd. The same with Israel. Israel has been for the past 80 years portrayed as part of the in crowd. We don't know much about Palestinians. They're a bit anonymous. They don't even have their own state or government to actually implement much propaganda. And therefore, we do not associate them with our tribal instincts. And it becomes therefore very comfortable the moment we hear terrorism or Hamas or something, or October 7th, 2023, then at that moment, then our instincts open up to that propaganda, right? And we want to embrace that because it feels comforting. It feels good to have that simple narrative where we can portray the world as good versus evil rather than looking at complexity, which is kind of ironic, right? Because in many ways, the simplicity should be in basic moral principles, right? A basic moral principle is a child should not die. A child should not starve. And then from that basis, you can start looking at the complex ways in which we can solve this. But instead, we look for the simplicity not in morality, but in tribalism, in who is with us and who is against us. And from that perspective, then if that is your starting point, then morality is just an afterthought. Ethical principles are there if they don't bother you too much. But the key component is feeling safe in your in crowd. And that's where propaganda becomes incredibly effective.
I think what you're describing is the main difference for me between the Western bubble and how it shows within Europe or in the United States, and the difference is virtue signaling. Right? I said we Europeans, as the sophisticated people that we are, right, we like to say children shouldn't starve, but Hamas has been supporting them. And then the American way of expressing it is, if anything, a bit more honest, saying that I don't like Hamas and the terrorists, and so I support what the Israelis do.
Basically, in the United States, it's much more common to have someone just say, I'm pro-Israel, that's it. But that's also, interestingly enough, that's the difference between the two continents, that the United States, it's much more comfortable in dividing society and also global society into clear, overly simplistic, but clearly defined groups, right? Caucasian, African American, Latino. In Europe, we don't feel comfortable creating those boxes of people. So that then translates to Israel in the sense of, I'm pro-Israeli and nothing else matters. I am always an ally of Israel. They can commit genocide. As far as I'm concerned, they will do it for the right reasons because they are part of my in crowd. Whereas a European will not that easily just automatically say, I am pro this group or pro that group, because we have been told to think, or at least speak in slightly more sophisticated terms, but the end result is exactly the same. We are supporting Israel and we are letting children starve.
Yeah, it's exactly that. That's basically the main thing that they both have in common, right? And that's the Western bubble, is the lack of personal responsibility, is the erosion of civil society and the social contract.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that people don't sufficiently realize. The way our society is going, and I think it's very clear that Western society is on the decline. We've discussed that plenty of times in this podcast. Decline not necessarily in that everything is terrible now, but you see the erosion, you see the basic institutions, basic frameworks losing their power, losing their utility. And too often people blame politicians, right? Corrupt politicians or governments or institutions. But in reality, liberal democracy stands and dies because of the individuals who make up that liberal democracy, right? The point of liberal democracy is that it doesn't rely on the government. It relies on society as a whole to get on and to be kind to each other. And currently, because of this declining these declining dynamics, it is very easy to just say, oh, it is governments who are screwing up. No, no, no. It is you who is screwing up. It is organizations, it's individuals who no longer remember to be kind to the other. And if you're not kind to the other, if you don't have basic moral values and moral principles that you start with, then liberal democracy cannot survive, because you're just going to go into your little bunker of self-interest, which is often very much defined by propaganda and tribalism and psychological mind games. And you're going to forget about your responsibility to wider society, that we all have to live in a liberal democracy with basic tolerance and basic proper kind behavior towards the other.
We brought a few examples of exactly that behavior missing. And one of them is, and this kind of shows you how much bad stuff is happening in the world right now, because I didn't even know about this until you pointed it out to me. I also don't read The Guardian as much as you do. I mean, throughout the next 10 minutes, we'll see some masochist tendencies within you, because you have a tendency to read and watch things that are not good for you, Balder. They're not good for your blood pressure, but you continue to do it. And this example here is from The Guardian, and it's about protests that I, again, haven't heard about in Epping in Essex, where the far right-wing crowd has basically been lingering around and protesting against a hotel where asylum seekers have been housed for some time now, and basically making them feel unsafe. Because, I mean, honestly, what makes you feel less safe than a bunch of young men with no hair, purposefully, right, intentionally having no hair, and weird boots standing in front of your in front of your home for the time being, and chanting you should go away.
Yeah, and these are again the extreme the extreme sides of society. That's the sort of the neo-Nazis, the fascists, who also just like this idea of fighting, right? There are some people very much attracted to this idea of just not just having an in-crowd and an out-crowd, but actively fighting the enemy, right? And in this case, they've identified asylum seekers and also, by the way, the establishment as the enemy. And then you've got this whole large group of people who will say, oh no, I don't like their aggression, I don't like the violence that they're employing. However, I wish I don't like that they should be that they're violent, but there is a problem, and I also don't want any asylum seekers in my hometown. And I understand it, right? So, whereas, once again, the sentence should have stopped with, I don't like violence. Okay, so how do we stop that violence? That's the only relevant issue then, right? So what was very painful, particularly here, besides the fact that it's not in my backyard kind of dynamics, right? Governments all over Europe find it very hard to find any housing for asylum seekers, because this enormous anti-immigrant and anti-asylum propaganda that exists, and that lives in the hearts of so many Europeans. But what was particularly painful was that there were a few brave, kind of very kind, soft-spoken souls who stood up for asylum seekers. They're next to the neo-Nazis, next to the fascists, and they were basically assaulted by those skinheads, right? They were assaulted by those aggressive men, shouted at, being called all kinds of names. And the police found it very difficult to deal with that. And at some point, the police even said, like, hey, if you know that this is going to lead to them becoming aggressive, please don't protest in favor of asylum seekers, which is the wrong way around, right? How can you actually, as the police, say, oh, people shouldn't protest because then other people are going to be violent against you? Well, hold on, it's these other people who are going to be violent who are the problem, not a peaceful, kind, soft-spoken protester. We now live in a society that no longer understands basic decency. And if it was based on some kind of rational analysis, right? If basic decency got in the way of our survival, yeah, it's a classic philosophical conundrum, right? You are in a boat with a bunch of people and you have to throw someone out, otherwise the boat sinks. Okay, then then you have a conversation to be had. But that's, of course, not the case with asylum seekers or with immigrants. Immigrants are not actually damaging us in any way near the ways that we pretend that they are. It is a fake theater based on our anxiety, based on our dark feelings, that is leading to us collapsing our own future. Basically, we are destroying our own future by forgetting about these very basic principles.
Speaking of people forgetting basic principles, one topic that I think has kept the internet busy in the past few weeks was the merger of Paramount, right? The situation is very convoluted in that sense, right? So you have these two companies that want to merge, and for that to happen, the FCC in the United States must approve that. The FCC, however, answers to the U.S. president. So the U.S. president shouldn't have a word in this. But this U.S. president doesn't care, right? So he was already upset with them for one of the shows they had, right, called 60 Minutes, which is I personally think a very cool interview format, where Trump was really upset about how Kamala Harris was portrayed there. So he sued them. He sued CBS, I think it was, which belongs to Paramount. And basically they settled with him, paying 16 million US dollars, I think, into the future presidential library of Donald Trump, right? So that was kind of done to make the anger go away and to ease the approval by the FCC, aka open corruption, and then to put the cherry on top of the cake, Stephen Colbert, who is in charge of the Late Show, right? So late shows are a huge thing in the US, and people love watching them. And Stephen Colbert is one of the, I think, most outspoken critics of Trump, at least on late night television. That show was canceled allegedly for financial reasons, but I think most people know what the real reasons were, and that's that Trump asked them to cancel Colbert.
Yeah, and even though Paramount vaguely denied it and said, "Oh, no, it's just because they're making a loss and we can't continue this." And it's true, by the way, that television has been in trouble, right, because of streaming services and all that. If you're, excuse me, if you are a executive of CBS, you should understand that you've got a social responsibility and you can't just look at the profit. And I know that sounds very naive, especially in US society where capitalism is everything. But the moment that you cancel Colbert in a situation like this, even if in your mind, which I don't believe was the case, but even if in your mind it's got nothing to do with you buttering up the Trump administration, then you should still understand the symbolic darkness of this. You should still understand that by canceling Colbert right at the moment that you have this issue with the FCC and with the White House, then that is going to send a signal, a very scary signal to media everywhere, saying you need to toe the line of the current administration, which is, once again, deeply detrimental to liberal democracy. Liberal democracy only functions if the government doesn't have that power, if media organizations act independently and typically critically of the government. And the moment that someone like Colbert gets cancelled, that's a very, very dark day for any kind of hope for democratic sustainability.
And to continue this list, because unfortunately it does continue, we also are looking at the case of Colombia University, who also ran into some trouble with the Trump administration, who was really upset with them for all their diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, but particularly at students protesting against Israel. So he also, first he took the funding away. We've talked about this in the last 6 months, but then he also sued them, and now they've agreed on a $200 million settlement with the administration, and they agreed to revoke 70 the degrees of 70 students who participated in those protests.
Yeah, I don't think we need to say much about that except to obviously just acknowledge how dark this is. A university So, an interesting little anecdote is universities are supposed to be institutions that are independent from political interference. That's why professors have tenure, right? Often people criticize tenure, like professors can basically not be fired. But the point is that they should be able to write and research and teach in the way that they feel is correct without anyone telling them to change their behavior. That's very important for a well-functioning liberal democracy. Interesting little anecdote is that here in Spain, universities during the Franco years were built, including Autónoma, in a way that the police could control them. They were built in a way that police horses could basically easily get in and basically arrest any protesters, etc., because that was under Franco, that was under a dictatorship. Exactly because universities are seen as a potential danger to governments. That is a good thing for liberal democracy. You want universities to be the danger to governments because that keeps the government sharp. And if things go wrong, then academics can point it out. That's how the balance of powers functions in a well-organized society. Unfortunately, with Colombia doing this, basically you can throw that out of the window. Just like Paramount, just like media companies, universities are now essentially being told either you do what we tell you to do, you follow our political line, or you're going to be in serious trouble.
Well, and the kind of the continuation of all of this are weird media formats, right? So social media formats. And this is again, Paul, where your masochist side comes out, because you keep on sending me videos of Jubilee, right? I think a YouTube channel from the United States. They always have very weird discussion formats, which I fundamentally disagree with the formats because it has running involved, right? People running to the center to make their point. That immediately makes me uncomfortable because just raise your hand, be in a civilized world. And you keep on sending these to me because they have formats like, one person against 20, right? So, I don't know, Ben Shapiro against 20 liberals. And then here we had basically the counter format to that, which was 20 MAGA maniacs, I want to call them, against, now his name slipped from my mind. What was his name?
Mehdi Hassan.
Yeah, who is also an intellectual, right?
Yeah. I mean, he's a debater. He's originally was born in the UK, but I think he's now a US citizen. He's a media personality, very good at debating. Now, I do want to take issue. It's not as if I watch Jubilee on a daily basis. It's just that in my news feeds, they come up sometimes. Once that's welcome to the algorithm, and I completely agree with you. It's a horrifying format. I don't have an issue with debates in themselves if they're done properly, respectfully, and constructively with the right goals. That's often Jubilee doesn't care. Jubilee just wants hits, and you get this situation where it's not just you call them MAGA. I think that Mehdi Hassan thought he was gonna debate Trump supporters, but these were far to the right of Trump supporters. These were people openly calling, I just mentioned Franco, openly calling for a new Franco to be leading the United States, basically a authoritarian dictatorship. People aggressively calling for the end of democracy. Now, Jubilee can make a choice, right? They can say, look, it's a free country. It's a free, still at the moment it is. They're allowed to platform anyone they like. Instead, however, they could also say, hang on, we are not going to platform some neo-Nazis. We're not going to platform people who are calling for Franco to be reintroduced as a political institution. And the fact that they don't shows a lot, again, about that individual responsibility. This is not the White House. This is Jubilee basically facilitating a societal decline towards autocracy, towards authoritarianism, because it is not a thoughtful debate. If you want to have a thoughtful debate about autocracy or authoritarianism versus liberal democracy, I would be all for it. Carefully exploring the differences and all that. But that's not this. This is just people shouting out their darkest inner feelings that are often deeply racist, deeply xenophobic, and deeply destructive, even genocidal. arguably saying, hey, that's fun. Now we get more people to view us.
Right, I think we need a new segment in our episodes, basically videos we sent each other throughout the week. Because so this was one of them. Another one was I saw just a snippet of a podcast, right? I mean, by now, and I have to be careful here because I'm also a young person with a podcast. But I feel like below the age of 30, you shouldn't, right? Just stay off, right? Don't take a microphone into your hand because, and of course, so this one, I think I'll just put the name in the description because I do not want to like basically have any direct links to them, just not to give them any more clout in that sense. But it's a group of young people who are discussing the topic of Israel and the Jews, right? Which is already a red flag the moment people are no longer differentiating between Israel and the Jews. And they're in the United States, I should add. And they are theorizing about, you know what, if the Germans were so mad at the Jews during the Second World War, maybe they had it coming for it. Maybe they did something. Maybe the Germans knew something. And here as a German, I'm sitting there thinking, oh, great, we're now explaining the Holocaust, right? And it's another thing of individual responsibility, right? Like this example or the other extreme, right? The Nelk boys interviewing Netanyahu on a podcast. Take some personal responsibility. If you don't know about a topic, shut up. Don't talk about it. You don't hear the two of us giving a podcast on, different types of French cheese.
No, or quantum mechanics. That's always the example I like to use. But this is what the internet has done, and specifically when it comes to politics and when it comes to international relations and those kinds of things, the Dunning-Kruger effect is real and strong. People know a little bit about politics, know a little bit about international relations, know a little bit about Israel, and they think that therefore now social media entitles them to have a perspective on that, to have an analysis on that. And that, of course, leads to the darkest of dark dynamics. Essentially, people are completely ignorant, spouting nonsense that then becomes somehow mainstream, and that then forces governments and institutions to start catering to that and start publishing little books like books on deportation for minors. We now live in a society where everyone feels entitled to have strong feelings and opinions on everything. Intellectuals no longer are allowed to be some kind of filter. And this is the end result, the end of liberal democracy.
Absolutely. Usually we would end at this point, but I do want to end on a bright side because we've talked so much about personal and individual responsibility. Yesterday, the Christopher Street Day parade took place in Berlin. The pictures were lovely and everything. People seemed to have fun. But there were about 35 neo-Nazis who organized a counter protest or parade. Luckily, they were very quickly arrested because they were carrying weapons with them, right? Rule number one of the protest, don't bring weapons. And there was a lovely video as one of the children, because those were literal children, was arrested and basically brought by, so the police must have called the mother, and then the child was released into the custody of the mother. You have a video that I will definitely link to of the mother screaming in German at the child what the hell he thinks he's doing there, and to go home and to be ashamed of himself. And that level of parental duty and individual responsibility, I think we should end on that level and kind of, right, and just take that mindset into the summer break.
Yeah, be good parents, be caring and loving towards your children, and make sure that they love those around them.
This seems like a great moment to end today's conversation. If you have any questions, comments, or you heard a mistake that we've made throughout the episode, please make sure to send us an email to thewesternbubble@gmail.com, and we will try to incorporate them in our following episodes. Thank you very much to listeners for joining us today and during the season. Make sure to join us again in September when we return from our summer break. That is it from my side. Balder, which closing quote did you pick for us today?
Well, I just said that there's no longer an intellectual filter, and that people have all of their own opinions being thrown out, and they often hide their deep immorality under the guise of, hey, just rationally we need to do something, right? It's a tough choice, but unfortunately we have to send children back, or unfortunately in Gaza children have to starve. One of the great intellectuals that lived in an era when intellectuals still did have the power to influence society was Bertrand Russell, and he wrote, "It has been said that man is a rational animal. All my life I have been searching for evidence which could support this.